The room was draped in candlelight, golden and grand, as if power could be poured into every corner of a ballroom. Glass clinked. Laughter rose and fell. Behind velvet curtains and towering floral arrangements, billionaires toasted, smiled, and whispered names that moved markets. But on the terrace, just past the crystal doors, stood Mabel Hart. Her champagne flute trembled faintly in her hand, though she didn't notice. A soft breeze swept the edge of her silver gown, trailing satin like smoke behind her. Her gaze, fixed and distant, was locked on the one man in the room no one had expected to show. Julian Crane. He stood near the stage, dressed not to impress, but to declare. Sleek black suit, no tie, no pretense. The air around him shimmered with quiet defiance. He wasn't part of this world, not by blood, but he'd earned his way here, inch by burning inch. And now, he was staring at her. Mabel's breath caught, not from fear, not from recognition, but something stranger, something older, like déjà vu wrapped in longing. Their eyes met, and for one brief second, the entire room fell away. She turned sharply toward the doors, heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. Inside, the gala roared on. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, Hart Global's new charity initiative for tech education, hosted in her name. Her father, Edward Hart, had arranged every detail. The guests, the photographers, even her speech had been vetted. Perfect optics, perfect family, perfect lie. The moment Julian's name had appeared on the list of confirmed attendees, Edward's composure had cracked like a flawed diamond. He'd whispered something to his assistant, tightened his jaw, and vanished toward the hallway without a word. Why? Why was her father, one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, so afraid of a man Mabel had never even heard him mention? She returned to the ballroom just in time to hear the MC's voice call to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Julian Crane, founder of Synnex Technologies and tonight's surprise benefactor. Whispers flew like sparks. Even Mabel's closest allies looked stunned. Julian took the stage with calm precision, his voice smooth and deliberate. It's an honor to be here tonight. I believe in the future this foundation promises. And I believe. His eyes swept the room before landing on Mabel. That truth has a place at the table, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Mabel's heart dropped. What was he really here for? What did he know? And why, when he looked at her, did she feel like something inside her had been waiting to wake up? In the shadows near the exit, her father watched with clenched fists. Mabel didn't need to see his face to know. This wasn't just business. This was something deeper, older, buried. Some truths don't whisper. They arrive in silence, in the eyes of a man who knows everything your family buried. My dearest listener, welcome to the Chapters of Love. Tonight's story will unfold slowly, like truth peeling away from legacy. Have you ever locked eyes with someone who knew something you didn't? Someone who stirred something deep in you with just one glance? Where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere quiet with a cup of tea, or beneath soft streetlights with restless heart. If this story is already brushing against something tender inside you, please like this video. It gently tells the YouTube algorithm that love stories like ours still matter. And I'd truly love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever questioned everything you were raised to believe? For the sake of love, here's to finding clarity, even in the most complicated love. And may you always remember, your heart belongs here. They called it the Glass Castle, a penthouse perched atop Manhattan's shimmering skyline, walls of glass, floors of marble, every surface reflecting success. But for Mabel Hart, it was a place of silent dinners, locked memories, and carefully curated perfection. She grew up with the sound of high heels echoing on polished floors. Nannies came and went. Tutors whispered praise. And her father, Edward Hart, the iron-voiced tycoon of Whitmore Global, rarely looked up from his boardroom long enough to notice her at all. From the outside, her life was golden. From the inside, it was airless. Mabel had her mother's eyes, soft, almond-shaped, always seeing more than she should. Her mother, Eleanor, had once been the heart of their home, warm, unpredictable, a painter who left color everywhere she touched. But when Mabel was 10, Eleanor got sick, That was all they said. One day she was there, humming in the studio. The next, her easel was gone, and her name was no longer spoken. Edward replaced her absence with rules. Structure. Steel. "We do not cry in this house," he told Mabel, the day she asked where her mother's canvases had gone. "We focus on the future." So Mabel learned to keep her voice low and her emotions lower. She took up photography instead of painting. Quiet, observational. Her camera became the only place she could safely feel. Through the lens, she could capture emotion without revealing her own. She smiled at gala events, attended Ivy League schools, designed clean, abstract exhibits that drew praise from critics. But inside, she lived in grayscale. Until one night, someone else entered the frame. Julian Crane's world had no castles, only the bitter shadows of one. He grew up in the staff quarters behind Whitmore Global's original campus in Connecticut. His father, Martin, had been Edward Hart's head of operations for over 2 decades. His mother, Teresa, managed logistics with the quiet precision of a woman who knew she'd never be thanked for her brilliance. Julian saw firsthand what loyalty to the Harts bought you: exhaustion, invisibility, and betrayal. At 16, Julian built something extraordinary, a prototype for a human emotion mapping AI that could detect trauma signatures in speech. He named it Leora, after his grandmother, whose grief had gone undiagnosed for years. Edward Hart called the invention brilliant. Promised mentorship, promised funding, promised the world. What Julian got instead was silence. And a year later, Edward unveiled a suspiciously similar AI under Whitmore Global's new mental wellness initiative, without ever mentioning Julian's name. Or Martin's. Julian watched his father's shoulders collapse the night that news aired on Bloomberg. Within months, Martin was forced to resign under a false misconduct claim. The heart attack came soon after. His mother never recovered. Not emotionally, not financially. She took a job cleaning private offices, stopped speaking his father's name, and kept a photograph of the Hart family turned face down in a drawer. Julian disappeared from the press, moved to Boston, studied, built, failed, tried again. He built Crane Labs from the ashes. No investors, no shortcuts. And when his AI finally won its first patent approval, the press called him the prodigy who came out of nowhere. But he wasn't from nowhere. He was from Edward Hart's forgotten back hallways. And now, years later, Julian Crane stood at the gala in the very building his family once helped run. Taller, sharper, more composed than anyone expected. His name now echoed in rooms that once erased it. Mabel had heard of Crane Labs. Everyone had. It was a fast-rising rival to Whitmore Global's aging tech empire. Edward hated even saying the name. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Julian had already mapped out every flaw in her father's company, every shell corporation, every whistleblower silenced, every version of truth the world hadn't yet seen. He hadn't come to the gala to network. He came to look the Hart legacy in the eye. What he didn't expect was her, Mabel, soft-spoken, beautiful in a way that wasn't rehearsed, distant but searching. She didn't smile easily. But when she did, it felt like sunlight on stone. When their eyes met, it wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. Something clicked, like 2 puzzle pieces with jagged edges. Julian knew exactly who she was. She had no idea who he was. Yet, and from the side of the room, Edward Hart watched it happen. His grip on the champagne glass tightened. His expression shifted. And without a word, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the gala. Back in the glass castle, Mabel would later scroll through the photos from the night. Her own eyes lingered on one candid frame. Herself, frozen mid-laugh, Julian standing just behind her, not quite touching but impossibly close. Why did it feel like he was already part of her story? Why did her father's reaction haunt her more than she could explain? She didn't know that the questions had only just begun. The assignment came with no fanfare. An email, a client brief, a signed NDA. The name, Crane Labs. Mabel Hart nearly deleted it. She'd been commissioned as a creative partner in a high-profile collaboration between a major tech innovator and the New York Museum of Digital Futures. It was a philanthropic project, part exhibition, part awareness campaign, meant to explore the intersection of emotional healing and artificial intelligence. She hadn't expected him, Julian Crane, the man whose eyes had made her breath catch at a gala, the man her father refused to speak about, whose company had been climbing charts while Whitmore Global's numbers quietly faltered. She considered declining. Every instinct said this was a collision waiting to happen. But something deeper, quieter, said, go. So she went. They met in a sunlit studio wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass. Mabel stood beside her camera, checking lighting angles. Julian arrived 5 minutes early, with no assistant and no small talk. Their handshake was firm, their eye contact electric. "Miss Hart," he said, without a hint of irony. "Mr. Crane," she returned, her chin slightly raised. There was no warmth, but no hostility either, only the awareness of lines not yet drawn. Julian began explaining the exhibit layout, where the sensory mirrors would be placed, how the real-time emotional responses would be translated into art. His tone was sharp, efficient. Mabel listened, nodding, arms crossed, not in defiance, but self-protection. When he finally paused, she tilted her head. "So, where does the human part come in?" He frowned. "Excuse me, you're designing a system to mirror pain, without revealing your own. That's not art. That's architecture." Silence. Then something flickered behind his eyes. A spark of interest. She'd challenged him and hadn't flinched. The next few sessions were tense. Mabel moved through the project with quiet precision, treating Julian like any other client. She took her photos, edited them late at night, asked questions that annoyed him only because they were so precise. He, in turn, offered no unnecessary compliments, only feedback. But he began lingering longer after their meetings, asking about her techniques, her creative choices. "Why always black and white?" he asked once. "Because people lie in color," she said softly. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away. At first, she thought he was arrogant, always composed, always slightly distant, as if he carried 1,000 calculations in his head and wasn't sure she could keep up. But then he'd do something unexpected. Bring her an espresso, exactly the way she liked it, without ever asking. Lower his voice when her breathing changed, like he noticed the moment she grew overwhelmed. Suggest they take a break when she rubbed her temple, even though the day was packed. Arrogant? Maybe, but also observant, controlled, almost careful. Julian hadn't expected her either. He thought she'd be cold, corporate, trained in deflection like her father. But Mabel Hart was all feeling. She just didn't know what to do with it. She was sharper than most people gave her credit for. Her comments struck at the heart of things. Her lens saw people's truths before their faces did. And when she talked about her mother, briefly once, while adjusting lighting for a child subject, Julian's fingers curled into his palm. "She painted everything," Mabel said, "even the walls. But after she died, my father had it all repainted in white. He said color was distraction." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "Color's not a distraction," he said. "It's memory." She didn't reply, but her hands trembled slightly. Then came the moment everything tilted. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Julian was reviewing the final sensor data feeds when Mabel, seated across the room, asked casually, "Did you always want to build an empire?" Julian didn't look up. "No." "Then why did you—" He set the tablet down. Finally met her eyes. "Because someone tried to erase me. So I built something too big to ignore." There was a long pause. "I understand that," she said. And in that silence, something passed between them. Recognition. Of what? They weren't sure yet. But it was real. Then Edward found out. The first storm came in the form of a furious phone call. "Mabel," his voice was sharp, controlled. "Why are you working with Julian Crane?" She hesitated. "Because I was assigned, and I said yes." "You don't know who that man is." "I think I'm starting to," she replied carefully. Edward's silence was the worst part. You will withdraw from the project immediately, he ordered. This is not a request. But Mabel didn't answer. For the first time in her life, she didn't know if her father's orders were meant to protect her or himself. That night, she lingered outside the studio longer than she needed to. Julian was alone, reviewing data. She didn't speak right away. Just watched him. Tall, sharp-eyed, unreadable. You don't talk about your past much, she said. He glanced at her. Neither do you. Is it true what they say? That you came out of nowhere? Julian stood, walked toward her, slow and measured. I came from your father's basement, he said. My name was never supposed to leave it. Mabel's breath hitched. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was grief. Grief so old it had turned into steel. She stared at him, unsure whether to run or reach for him. Instead, she whispered, I don't know what to believe anymore. He nodded once. Then start with what you feel. After that night, after Julian's quiet confession about her father's betrayal, something unspoken lingered between them. Mabel returned home to the penthouse she shared with her father. Her thoughts knotted in questions. The art collaboration was still active, but she stopped showing up to the studio. Not out of protest, not out of obedience, but because her heart was no longer sure what it was walking into or walking away from. Julian didn't call. He didn't need to. They were both standing on opposite shores of the same ocean, each carrying a weight only the other could name. Still, Mabel sent one final email to the project's coordinator, a formal step back. No reasons given, only a short line. Sometimes art reflects more than the artist is ready to see. What she didn't expect was that walking away from Julian would lead her straight into the fire she thought she'd left behind. It started with a wrong turn. Mabel had come home early, planning to retrieve one of her old photography portfolios from her father's home office. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of hush that settles just before something breaks. She stepped lightly down the hall, the soft thud of her heels muffled by imported wool rugs. As she reached the oak doors of the boardroom, she froze. Voices, her father's, and another, low, sharp male. I've already paid them off. The NDA holds. And if Crane pushes for discovery, he won't. He doesn't have the original journal. And the patent? We buried it with Eleanor. Mabel's heart stopped. Eleanor? She leaned closer, breath shallow. We told the press it was illness, Edward was saying. It was cleaner that way. Easier for Mabel. The lawyer's voice dropped. And the prototype? Edward's answer came like ice. It was never his. The moment he handed it over, he stopped existing. Mabel didn't remember how she got out of the house, only that her hands were shaking when she reached the car, and her chest ached with a pain she hadn't felt in over a decade. Her mother's journal? Julian's patent? None of it made sense, and yet all of it did. She couldn't sleep that night. At 2:13 a.m., she tore through boxes in her late mother's storage trunk. Photo albums, old scarves, postcards, and there, wedged behind a dried lavender sachet, was a photograph, two young faces. Julian, barely 17, beaming beside a woman with warm eyes and wind-tangled curls. Her mother. They were laughing. Their shoulders touched. And in Eleanor Hart's hand was a notebook, the same red leather cover that Mabel remembered seeing on her nightstand the week before her death. The next morning, Mabel went to Crane Labs. No email, no appointment. She stood in the marble lobby in her long beige coat, the photograph clutched in her hand. When Julian stepped out of the elevator and saw her, his expression shifted, not surprised, not angry, but ready. He led her into his office silently. Once the door closed, she dropped the photo on the table between them. Tell me the truth, she whispered. All of it. Julian didn't sit. He stared at the photo, then at her, his voice low, steady. She believed in what I built. Your mother. She was the only one who saw what it could become. Mabel swallowed. Her mouth felt dry. But the story was, she got sick. Julian exhaled, almost like a prayer. She didn't get sick. She got silenced. And then he told her everything. How Eleanor had seen the brilliance in his AI prototype, the way it could revolutionize care for trauma patients, especially children. How she'd promised to present it to Edward personally. Julian had trusted her. He was still just a teenager. But instead, Edward filed a patent under Whitmore Global, rebranded the software, cut Julian out. When Eleanor discovered it, she was furious. She threatened to expose him. A week later, she collapsed at a company gala. Poison. Mabel's voice cracked. Julian didn't answer directly. He didn't need to. What I do know, he said quietly, is that she was going to go public with the journal. Then she was gone. And your father made sure her name was wiped from every internal archive at Whitmore Global. Mabel's knees buckled. She sat hard, like the weight of the truth had physically struck her. And the journal, she whispered. Julian opened his drawer, took out a wrapped cloth bundle, placed it on the table, and slowly unfolded it. Inside, the red leather notebook. Her mother's handwriting covered the first page. Mabel reached out, her fingertips trembling. The last entry was dated 3 days before Eleanor's death. If they erase me, I hope one day she finds the truth. She has my eyes and all of my fire. Mabel wept, not just for the betrayal, but for the years she'd spent idolizing a man who had erased her mother's legacy. For the little girl she'd once been, holding her father's hand at the funeral, believing every word he said. Julian said nothing. He didn't reach for her, didn't interrupt. He let her break in peace. Because some truths don't require comfort, only presence. And in that silence, something shifted again. Not hatred, not love, but truth, a raw, aching recognition that they were no longer enemies. They were survivors of the same fire. My beautiful listeners, what would you do if one truth changed everything? If the very people you trusted most had built your world on silence? Would you cling to the lie that kept you safe, or step into the fire that could set you free? If this story is lighting up something raw in your heart, let the algorithm know love stories still matter. Like this video, and tell me in the comments, what's the bravest truth you've ever faced? Wherever you are today, may you feel seen, may you feel safe, and may you never walk alone into the truth. The days after the journal broke, Mabel's heart unfolded like a quiet storm. She didn't answer her father's calls. She couldn't look him in the eye without hearing her mother's voice whispering from those torn pages. Eleanor's journal had shattered something inside her, a glass illusion. She hadn't even realized she'd been living inside. Whitmore Global's tower still stood tall, a beacon of wealth and influence. But inside Mabel, its foundation had already crumbled. She packed a small bag with no plan, no direction, just her camera, her mother's journal, and a single postcard Eleanor once scribbled on Edgewater Lake. Your laugh echoes there. That's where she went. Julian found her the way you find what's lost, quietly and with intention. He had traced a location through a breadcrumb trail of card charges and an old photograph he once saw Eleanor holding, a place that mattered. When he found her, she was sitting alone on a weathered dock, barefoot, knees drawn to her chest, her eyes lost in the ripples. He didn't speak, not right away. He sat beside her, not too close, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone. You shouldn't have come, she murmured. Julian glanced at the lake. Then why did you leave me a trail? She didn't respond, but she didn't ask him to leave either. They sat there as the sun dipped low, until silence turned from distance into comfort. That night, truth was a bridge. They talked, really talked, about Eleanor, the way her laughter used to fill rooms, how Mabel always felt there was something missing from the official story. Julian told her about the day Edward stole his AI blueprint, the moment his father collapsed after reading the legal letters. The pain of building something brilliant, only to have it buried. My father died apologizing to me for not protecting what I built, Julian said. But he should have apologized for letting me believe I wasn't enough. Mabel placed her hand over his. You were always enough. He was just afraid of you. Julian turned to her then, not with the calculated sharpness he wore in boardrooms, but with bare humanity. You're not your father, Mabel. You never were. She blinked back tears. I don't know who I am anymore. Julian touched her cheek. You're the woman who saw the truth and didn't look away. The first kiss didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a homecoming. It was slow, reverent, a brush of lips, a breath of understanding. She kissed him like she wasn't sure it would last. He kissed her like it already had. They made love in a cabin Eleanor once stayed in, beneath old pine rafters, wrapped in the scent of rain and wood smoke. Julian treated her body like something sacred. He didn't ask for promises, only presence. Mabel wept when he whispered, "You're not a piece in his empire. You are the revolution he feared." The morning after was gentle. No rush, no shame. Julian brought her tea and wrapped her in his sweater. She showed him old photographs, and he told her stories he'd never shared with anyone, not even his board. They planned nothing, spoke of everything. For once, time didn't press them. Back in the city, the world waited to see what she'd choose. Would she return to Whitmore Global and protect the lie? Or stand beside the man her father called enemy? Edward tried calling again, dozens of times. He even sent a driver to the lake. Mabel ignored them all. When she finally stepped out of the cabin, Julian was by her side. She reached for his hand and didn't let go. They returned to the city not as strangers bound by shared secrets, but as something unspoken yet unshakable. Mabel didn't wear her defiance like armor. She wore it like a quiet truth. Her silence in the car said everything. I'm not turning back. But the world hadn't been quiet in her absence. By the time they reached Julian's penthouse, the headlines were everywhere. Whitmore heiress linked to rival CO. Julian Crane accused of tech sabotage. Betrayal in the boardroom? Edward Hart hadn't waited. He'd gone to war. Within 24 hours, he'd pulled every string he had. Freezing Mabel's trust fund, leaking documents that painted Julian as a corporate thief, stirring old rumors about his family. Investors were spooked. Crane Labs stock dropped by 7% in a single afternoon, but Julian never flinched. He stood in his boardroom, his sleeves rolled up and his voice steady. We don't bury truth to keep peace, he told his team. We build louder with it. Mabel watched him, and something in her healed. He wasn't perfect. He was principled. He wasn't asking her to pick sides. He was offering her freedom to decide. Still, the storm grew louder. That evening, Edward called her. This time, she picked up. Mabel, his voice was tight. I've given you space. But this public betrayal. Truth isn't betrayal, Dad. I gave you everything. No, she said softly. You gave me a glass house and called it a kingdom, but it was always built on someone else's ruin. He went silent. Then came the knife. You want him? Fine. You can have him. But you'll have nothing from me. No inheritance. No company seat. No protection when he burns you. She swallowed the lump in her throat. Then I'll build something you can't take. He hung up. Julian knew the call had happened. He could see it in her eyes. You don't have to stay in this, he said that night, sitting on the edge of her bed. Not for me. You've lost too much already. But Mabel only stepped closer. You don't push away the person who stayed when the world ran. The next morning, she walked into Crane Labs with her camera slung over her shoulder and asked Julian if she could help document the team's new AI initiative. Not as Edward's daughter, not as a hidden legacy, as herself. When the press caught wind of her being at Crane Labs, Edward issued a statement. Whitmore Global distances itself from actions taken by my daughter, Mabel Hart, who does not represent the values of our institution. Mabel responded with one sentence on her personal page. The institution you built was on stolen ground. The internet exploded. And in the midst of that noise, Julian called a press conference. Mabel stood beside him. The world waited. And Julian, with every camera lens pointed at his face, didn't defend himself. He told the story about the patent, the lies, the way his father died nameless. And then, looking straight into the crowd, he said, I didn't steal anything. I rebuilt what was mine from the ground up. I owe nothing to the empire that tried to erase me, except this. He reached for Mabel's hand. This woman, who was never the lie, only the light. I didn't win her. I didn't buy her. She saw me and chose me. And Mabel? She lifted her chin and said, I'm not a princess in anyone's story. I am the author of my own. And the world listened. My beautiful listeners, has your heart ever made a choice the world didn't understand? Have you ever risked comfort for something real? If this story is stirring something brave within you, take a moment to like this video. It tells the YouTube algorithm that truth still matters. And tell me in the comments, would you walk away from a legacy if love offered you freedom instead? Wherever you are listening from tonight, be a quiet garden or a room full of noise, may you feel seen, supported, and deeply proud of the battles you've chosen. Your heart belongs here. The dust had barely settled from the press conference, but Mabel knew this story wasn't done. A single speech couldn't cleanse years of silence. A scandal couldn't rewrite the names erased. This truth had to live somewhere, not just spoken, but seen. Mabel booked the largest wing of the Whitmore Museum, the very institution named after her father's legacy. Irony, she thought, had a funny way of coming full circle. The installation was called Unwritten. It featured projected AI schematics, Julian's original blueprints, complete with timestamps predating Whitmore Global's patent filing by nearly 2 years. Beside them were blown-up journal pages, Eleanor's handwriting, raw and unrevised. I know what Edward has done. I see what he's afraid of. But I won't be quiet. Not for my marriage. Not even for Mabel. The truth must outlive me. Some pages were stained with tears. Others with smudges of ink, where Eleanor had scribbled frantically into the night. Mabel had chosen to keep those smudges visible. Because truth isn't always clean. But it is powerful. The night of the opening, the room was silent. Reporters, critics, CEOs, employees from Crane Labs and Whitmore Global. Every face leaned forward. And then Mabel stepped onto the stage. She didn't speak from behind a podium. She stood in front of a photograph. Her mother, smiling in soft light, one hand on baby Mabel's shoulder. She held the mic loosely, like she wasn't trying to prove anything. Just tell the truth. I was raised inside a story I didn't write. One that praised power but punished honesty. That asked me to smile in photographs and never asked why the people I loved kept disappearing. But truth has a way of finding its way home. She turned, motioning toward Julian's patent on the screen. What you see here is not just invention. It's intention. It's what my father stole from someone he once called brilliant. And it's what Julian rebuilt from ashes. And then she paused, lifting a small page, her mother's final journal entry. This is from my mother Eleanor. A woman the world was told was unwell. But what she really was inconvenient, too brave, too honest. Legacies built on silence must be broken by daughters who find their voice. The next day, every major news outlet ran the story. Eleanor Hart's journal uncovered. Julian Crane's patent confirmed. Whitmore legacy shaken. Mabel Hart breaks generational silence. Edward Hart was forced to resign from the Whitmore Global Board. Shareholders turned their backs. Whistleblowers came forward. Investigations opened. But that didn't matter to Mabel. What mattered was that for the first time, her mother's name wasn't whispered in sorrow. It was spoken in respect. And Julian? He never asked for revenge. He stood in the back of the gallery that night, arms crossed, watching her shine. When she found him after the crowd had thinned, she whispered, "It's done." He looked at her, not like a man who had won, but like a man who had found peace. Later that week, Crane Labs held a press conference, not to retaliate, but to announce their partnership with a women-led STEM scholarship foundation named the Eleanor Initiative. Mabel would serve as its founder and creative lead. The world no longer saw Julian and Mabel as rebels. They were survivors, builders, and the love that had once been questioned now stood unquestionable, rooted in honesty, scarred by pain, but fully in the light. The spotlight faded. The applause dimmed. And what remained was silence. Not the heavy kind that once filled Mabel's childhood home, but a soft, sacred quiet. The kind you feel right before something beautiful begins. They returned to the lake. It had been months since Mabel last stood on the wooden dock by Eleanor's lake. The winter had softened, giving way to spring. Wildflowers stretched toward the water like they, too, were trying to remember something. Julian was already there, waiting like always, not rushing her, just ready. She took off her shoes and joined him at the edge. They said nothing for a while. Their hands brushed once, twice, until she took his fully in hers. "Do you ever think we were supposed to meet like this?" she asked softly. Julian didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "I used to think fate was just something people use to justify pain. But then you showed up, and I started believing in purpose again. A life that felt like theirs. They didn't marry in a cathedral. They married barefoot on the lake dock, under strings of soft golden lights, surrounded by only a few close friends and the quiet. Mabel wore her mother's locket. Julian wore no tie. When it came time for vows, Mabel reached into her pocket. Not for notes, but for one of Eleanor's journal pages, folded carefully. "If you find someone who sees all of you and stays anyway, hold on." She looked up, eyes misty. "You saw the truth before I did. Not just about my father, but about me, and you stayed. So now I stay too." Julian's vow was only one sentence. "You are no longer the girl in a castle of glass. You're the woman who walked through fire, and I get to love you after." Their days became ordinary in the most extraordinary way. They painted their home in colors Mabel had never been allowed to choose as a child. Yellow for the kitchen, sage for the sunroom. Bookshelves lined every hallway. She kept photographing moments, people, even Julian when he wasn't looking. He created a corner in Crane Labs just for her, a small studio where art and tech could breathe together. Some nights, they stayed up until 2 a.m. debating ideas. Some mornings, they woke tangled in warmth, the sun spilling over both their faces. One evening, while going through boxes in Julian's childhood home, Mabel found something unexpected. A letter from Eleanor, dated months before her death. "Julian, if you're reading this, it means you survived the storm I feared might drown us both. I see in you a heart strong enough to change the world, and I see in my daughter's spirit just like yours. Maybe that's why I dared to hope. If someday your paths cross, be gentle with her. She will have questions, but she will also be your answer." Mabel pressed a letter to her chest and cried, not from grief, but from gratitude. Her mother had seen what even time couldn't dim: truth, love, and a future waiting to be written. One day, Mabel released a new photo series called The Unbroken. Its final frame? Julian and Mabel side by side, holding hands under soft spring light, standing in front of the lake. Her camera set on a timer, but her heart guiding the lens. The caption was simple: "Some love stories begin with truth. Ours began with a lie and still found its way to the light. Not all love stories challenge the world, but some change everything." Mabel wasn't rescued. She rescued herself. The moment she stopped echoing her father's legacy and started listening to her own voice. And Julian, he wasn't after revenge. What he truly wanted was peace. Not the kind found in silence or resignation, but in the quiet presence of someone who sees all of you and stays. Because real love doesn't ask you to turn away from truth. It doesn't pretend or hide or protect you with lies. It stands beside you, even when the truth shakes the ground beneath your feet. Together, they didn't just fall in love. They rebuilt what power tried to destroy. A legacy not rooted in wealth or reputation, but in honesty, courage, and choice. In the end, Mabel and Julian didn't win by defeating Edward. They won by refusing to become him. And maybe that's the truest kind of power. My beautiful listeners, wherever you're watching from tonight, beneath a starlit sky, on a quiet morning train, or in the soft stillness of your own room, I hope this chapter found you right where your heart needed it most. Have you ever had to unlearn everything you thought was true just to protect your peace? Or fallen for someone who didn't save you, but helped you find yourself? If the story brushed up against something real in you, if it reminded you that love should never come at the cost of your voice, then please let it show. Like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the Chapters of Love. It tells the YouTube algorithm that stories with depth, warmth, and truth still matter. And more importantly, that you matter. May your legacy be built in truth. May your love be chosen, not inherited. And may you always find someone who sees your fire and never tries to put out. Until our next chapter, stay tender, stay brave, and always stay you.